All right, what's up, everyone? Andrew Bone here, with Bama Insider YouTube channel. Talking a little recruiting. We are 1 week away from National Signing Day. Put a bow on this year's recruiting class for schools throughout the country, and a lot of schools are looking to close strong over the course of the next week, including Alabama. Alabama, one of the schools that has a great chance to finish number one. They're currently rated as the number one recruiting class in the country, according to Rivals.com. And I think that they've got a chance to close really strong over the course of the next 7 days. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens, between now and next Wednesday. We kind of have an idea of, I think we have an idea of how things are going to shake out in the end, but you just never know. We kind of had a feeling back in the early signing period how things were going to go, and there were some twists and turns all the way up until the end, and then obviously Alabama closed extremely strong. So you just never know what may happen. So we're keeping a close eye on everything. There's visits daily for these prospects, in-home visits. There's, some last-minute official visits taking place, and obviously there's going to be some last-minute phone calls for a lot of these schools, to these recruits leading up until signing day. So, going to be crazy. See what happens. Alabama obviously hopes to finish strong. Hope to keep some of their kids on board that they've had committed for a while, but also get some big name guys in the end. So, what I want to talk about first today is I'm going to go over. Alabama currently has 24 signees, but you look at the commitment board and there's 28. So talk real quick about the other four guys that are currently committed to Alabama that haven't signed, kind of where things stand with them. Then I'm going to talk about some of the top remaining targets overall, and then we'll get to questions. I know I'll probably have a bunch of questions, so you can shoot them in. You can go ahead and do that, but I'm going to answer the questions at the end. But if you have something you want to know, just go ahead and fire it in, and I'll get to it here in a little bit. First off, let's talk about the guys that are committed right now. That obviously a lot of you guys want to know. Are they going to stick on board, or are they going to possibly go elsewhere? So we'll start on the offensive side of the ball. Cillian Robinson, 4-star running back from Washington D.C., didn't sign with Alabama in December. Which when he didn't sign, a lot of people just assumed, okay, he's not going to end up in Alabama's class. He's a Maryland kid. He wants to. He's going to end up going to Maryland because Michael Locksley's there now. Well, I don't think that's the case. I think he's pretty much finished with his recruitment. He hasn't taken any visits this month. The new running backs coach, Charles Huff, has already visited him a few times this month. I think he's locked in. So I'm not really concerned about Cillian Robinson heading into this final week. I think he sticks with Alabama. Chris Bogle, the edge rusher, outside linebacker out of Fort Lauderdale, committed to Alabama on January the 5th. Now, that is one that we're watching pretty closely because he took an official visit to Florida this past weekend. He's going to go to Miami this weekend on an unofficial visit. Miami's certainly pushing really hard. Manny Diaz had an in-home visit with Chris Bogle on Monday night, so they're coming after him pretty strong. And Alabama ended up winning winning his commitment in early January over Miami. So Miami, hasn't let up at all. And with Tosh Lapoy leaving, a lot of people assumed that may have some sort of effect that he may end up going elsewhere because of that. But I think with Alabama getting Charles Kelly, who recruited him for Tennessee, and Tennessee was one of his top three schools. Sal Sinceri, who had been recruiting him for Florida, getting him. I think that's all huge for Alabama. I think that helps a lot, and we'll kind of see if that ends up being a big determining factor for him. But definitely watching him pretty closely this weekend, see how things go. But would I be surprised if he flipped? No, not at all. I think that there's a good chance that he could flip, but I also think there's a chance he could stick on board. So we're watching Chris Bogle pretty closely. Byron Young, Alabama fans seem to love Byron Young. All the people on our message board, anytime we talk about the defensive lineman, everybody always wants to know what's going on with Byron Young. And Alabama loves this kid. They think he's one of the top overall guys in the recruiting class. Alabama ends up bringing over Mississippi State defensive line coach Brian Baker, which I think has really helped Alabama in terms of keeping Byron Young on board, because he has been looking around, and even though he's been saying that he's solid with his commitment, he has been taking some visits. He's been over to Ole Miss. He went to Mississippi State last weekend, and he's currently scheduled to go to LSU this weekend. Now Nick Saban had an in-home visit with him on Tuesday night. I think he ends up sticking with Alabama. Obviously have to watch this LSU trip this weekend, but I think in the end, Byron Young ends up sticking with Alabama. Then the final commitment in Alabama's class is Christian Williams, 4-star defensive back from Daphne High School. Alabama signed 5 defensive backs in December. I think they're only going to sign 5 defensive backs total. Christian Williams, I think he kind of hurt himself by holding out and deciding to wait until February to sign, because Alabama did push for him to go ahead and make a decision. They wanted him to go ahead and sign in December. When he didn't, I think the spot got full. And as of right now, not going to visit Alabama. Visited A&M this past weekend. He was in Miami 2 weeks ago. He's going to LSU this weekend. He's already made probably 3 or 4 visits to LSU over the course of the fall and now this upcoming weekend. So I actually think he's going to end up at LSU. So that's kind of a look. I think Alabama ends up. I definitely think they end up with at least 2 of the current commitments, Cillian Robinson and Byron Young. Like I said on Chris Bogle, wouldn't be surprised if he flipped, but still think he could end up sticking with Alabama. And then Christian Williams, expect him to go elsewhere. So, now we're going to look at the overall guys on the recruiting board. Where does Alabama stand? How many more guys can they take? And people ask me every single day, well, there's only 3 or 4 spots remaining. How many can we, who are we going to get in those spots? And I keep telling all the people on Bama Insider, I said, don't worry about the numbers. Just don't worry about it. These are the guys that Alabama's going after. If they can get them, they're going to figure it out. It's the last thing you need to do is worry about the overall numbers, because Alabama is the one that's worrying about that. They're going after the guys they're going after. We're telling you who they want, and if they can get them, they'll get them. And then they'll figure it out in the end. So we'll start on the offensive side of the ball, because there's not really that many players left on that side. And we'll start with Brett Seether, the 3-star tight end out of Clearwater, Florida. Really kind of exploded after his senior year. We've seen several offers go out to him, Georgia, Penn State, Alabama. He visited Georgia Tech. Now, he put out a top 5 list the other day. I think it was Alabama, Georgia, Michigan State, TCU. It's either, I think Penn State was in there. I don't think it was Syracuse, but those were kind of his top schools. Visited Alabama this past weekend, and visited Georgia 2 weekends ago. I think Georgia probably has the edge. I think they had the edge going into that visit with Alabama, but I think it could be really close. I think in the end he ends up picking between one of those 2 schools. I'm just leaning towards Georgia at the moment, but haven't made a final prediction just yet. But I think it ends up being one of those 2 schools for him. Offensive line, we kind of thought that offensive line was done. We, on signing day, or the early signing period, December the 19th, Alabama signed 5 offensive linemen, and it just seemed like they were completely finished. They weren't going to go after anyone else. Hadn't really heard anything about Darnell Wright, who they had been recruiting for such a long time, that they had recruited for a couple of years, and a lot of people thought that he was favoring Alabama. Then all of a sudden, once Alabama signed those 5 offensive linemen, including Evan Neal, the number 1 offensive lineman in the country, it seemed like Alabama was done. Communication had stopped with Darnell Wright a good bit, and they were finished. All of a sudden, they decided to visit Javon Shepard, 4-star offensive lineman out of Houston. He's committed to Texas A&M. Nick Saban's actually going to have an in-home visit with him tonight. So definitely a lot of interest there from Alabama side all of a sudden. He visited Tuscaloosa this past weekend on Saturday and Sunday. He was at Georgia previously before that. Still committed to Texas, but there's a lot of talk that his decision could end up being between Texas A&M and Alabama. I don't know if he's going to leave the state of Texas. I think Alabama's in there, but I think in the end he probably ends up picking between Texas and Texas A&M. But like I said, Nick Saban is going to have the in-home visit tonight with him. Things could obviously change there. Would Alabama accept his commitment? Yes, they would. I have been told that they would accept his commitment. So obviously another name to keep an eye on. And jumping back to, we talked about Cillian Robinson earlier as, an Alabama commitment, 4-star running back that I expect to keep with his commitment to Alabama. And we kind of said for a while that, Alabama was going to take 2 running backs. Trey Sanders signed with Alabama in December. Cillian Robinson expects to sign with Alabama next week. But all of a sudden, Jerion Ealy, the top 100 running back out of Jackson, Mississippi, former Ole Miss commitment, got visited last week by Alabama. Nick Saban, Pete Golding, Charles Huff, running backs coach, had an in-home visit with him, and he decided to set up an official visit to Alabama. He's going to be coming in this weekend for a visit. I'm starting to hear a lot of talk about Alabama now. It's kind of surprising, but Charles Huff, they had a great relationship when he was the Mississippi State running backs coach. They really connect extremely well, and I think there's a big push now coming for Jerion Ealy. Now, the thing with Jerion Ealy is he's a baseball star. A lot of people expect him to be a very high baseball pick in the draft this year, and so that's something you have to watch out for. He really likes Clemson a lot. Clemson's kind of been, ever since he decommitted from Ole Miss, Clemson has been perceived as the favorite for him. But I think that Alabama is starting to, really challenge Clemson. Now, he was at Ole Miss this past weekend. He's going to be, like I said, at Alabama this week. Then make a decision next week. But would not be surprised at all if he ends up, joining Alabama's recruiting class. So keep an eye on Jerion Ealy over the course of the next week. All right, so we've talked about some of the top guys on the offense side of the ball. We've talked about the guys that are committed, that, whether or not I think they're going to end up sticking with Alabama or not. And, now let's talk about the defense side of the ball. Pretty much what we're going to talk about is some defensive linemen and some linebackers. Alabama, as I've pretty much said since they had their early signing period, that and I've probably been saying it a lot longer than that Alabama wanted to sign 6 defensive linemen. That was kind of their number they've been going after for a very long time. Want to sign six defensive linemen in this year's class. So they signed 4. Now it's time to get 2 more. Byron Young, as we talked about earlier, I think he ends up sticking with Alabama. So that would be 5. So who's your 6th guy? Well, I think it's going to be Ishmael Sopsher, the top 100 defensive lineman out of Amite High School in Louisiana. Been a major target for a very long time for Alabama. Was in Tuscaloosa this past weekend for an official visit. He's going to take an official visit to LSU this upcoming weekend. So, that's the biggest hurdle I think Alabama has to go, because anything can change during that weekend visit. He can go down to LSU, spend time with Coach Ed Orgeron, who he has said multiple times that that's the coach that he has the best relationship with. So you have to watch that one pretty closely to see what happens. But I think heading into the visit, Alabama's in the driver's seat. So they would love to get Ishmael Sopsher, a guy that they've recruited for such a long time. And we've talked about him, the last several months, a lot due because of his brother Rodney Sopsher, who's in junior college and now has reclassified to the 2020 class instead of the 2019 class. A lot of schools were trying to scramble, try to figure out how they could fit him in. Now they don't have to worry about that. They don't have to worry about that until next year. So that kind of opened the doors for a lot of other schools rather than just the schools that had offered his older brother. So I think Alabama's in good shape there, but obviously have to watch what happens this weekend. Another big visitor for Alabama this weekend is Nathan Pickering, the 4-star defensive lineman out of Mississippi. He's committed to Mississippi State. I think it's probably a long shot for him at this point. I mean, even though he said some things that has looked good for Alabama. He said that Alabama's the one school that he could possibly see himself flipping to. Unbelievable relationship with Brian Baker, the new defensive line coach, coming over from Mississippi State. So that would have been his position coach at Mississippi State. A lot of people just kind of assume, well, that must be a done deal. Well, he's a Mississippi kid, He's been committed to Mississippi State since June. He just took his official visit to state. Has kind of come out and said that he is pretty solid. He said he's 100%. He said a coach. Don't commit to a coach, commit to a school. So I think that was kind of a shot at Brian Baker, leaving Mississippi State. But you just never know. You never know what may happen on an official visit, how a kid may feel coming off that trip, especially a couple days before National Signing Day. Things could completely change, for him this weekend. I think it's low percentage that he flips heading into the weekend, but we'll see what happens after this weekend, and kind of update y'all after the weekend visit. Now, there's some other defensive linemen that are still out there. Quayshawn Fuller, Florida State commitment, is going to visit this weekend out of Lehigh Acres in Florida. He's going to take an official visit. Jaquez Sorrells, 4-star defensive lineman out of Largo High School, and also in Florida, going to take an official visit this weekend. So Alabama still has a few other defensive line guys that are out there that they're still recruiting pretty heavily. Linebacker wise, pretty much, and I talked about Chris Bobo earlier. So if you guys missed that, basically just said Chris Bobo is going to take an official visit or an unofficial visit to Miami this weekend. He was at Florida this past weekend. I just think it's more of a toss up right now in terms of what he's going to do. I wish I could say yes, he's definitely going to stick with Alabama, or yes, he's definitely going to flip, but it's a lot more complicated than that. And, these schools are, pulling them, one way every single day. And, Alabama's trying to get him to stick on board, and Florida, Miami trying to get him to flip. I think he's just going to probably wake up on signing day and make a decision. So we'll have to wait. I think all of us are probably going to have to wait on that one. But in terms of linebacker wise, Henry Toula took an official visit to Alabama this past weekend. I think Alabama has regained the lead, regained the momentum that seemed to be lost when Tosh Lupoi ended up leaving Alabama. I think he had a great official visit this past weekend. I think his parents, his family's on board with Alabama. There's obviously a lot of talk about Tennessee. They were in the driver's seat once Tosh ended up leaving Alabama. But I think with Pete Golding's done a great job recruiting him. It's his position coach. So it's not like his position coach left. It was just his area recruiter who ended up leaving, even though he did have a great relationship with Tosh Lupoi. But his position coach still at Alabama. Head coach is still at Alabama. Alabama's still at Alabama. I mean, it's it's hard to, the program's not going to change, too much. So he knew what program he was, being recruited by, not necessarily what coach was recruiting him. So I think he had a great official visit this past weekend. I think Tennessee's still trying to, still trying to work some magic there. And, he may take an official visit to Washington, but as of right now, I'm penciling in Henry Toula to Alabama. I think I made my prediction back in maybe it was October, on the Rivals forecast, but of course I could have changed it, but you have decided to stick with that prediction, and I don't think I'm going to change it between now and when he announces his decision. So that's where I'm leaning right now. Daniel Humuli, who's a 4-star linebacker, also out of California, is going to take an official visit to Alabama this weekend. And I think he's a great football player. Was the MVP of the Polynesian Bowl. I just don't know if Alabama would take 2 more linebackers. If they end up getting Toula, I think they're probably done. But he's certainly a great player that's going to come in this weekend, and maybe Alabama pushes for him, but as of right now, I think Daniel Humula ends up at Washington. So that's kind of an overall look at where things stand. Pretty much every single top target. I think I've hit on every single top target. I don't think I've missed on any of the guys. Alabama's currently has the number 1 recruiting class in the country. There's other schools right there. Georgia's right there. Oklahoma's right there. But in the end, I think Alabama ends up closing with the top class in the country, because I think they end up getting Ishmael Sopsher. I think they end up getting Henry Toula. I think they will end up having a really strong finish, and we'll just have to wait and see how the rest of this goes. But let me see here if I can pull up any questions here. So I really appreciate all of you coming on board today. Talk a little bit about recruiting. I don't know if y'all have actually asked any questions because my screen that usually pops up with all the questions today is not pulling up for some reason. So I think we've gone over everything. We've gone over all the top remaining targets, and I've talked about where I think different guys are going. And just kind of a recap. Going back, looking at the current commitments, I think Alabama hangs on to Byron Young. I think they end up getting or hanging on to Cillian Robinson. Not sure on Bogle. Christian Williams, he'll end up going to LSU, in my opinion. Offensive line, offensive side of the ball. Could see Jerrion Ely joining the class. Obviously, as I mentioned, Cillian Robinson sticks on board. As of right now, seeing Brett Seether going to Georgia, over Alabama, but still I think it's a top two. Javon Shepard I think he ends up sticking in state. Defensive line wise, Sopsher and Byron Young, I think those are the two guys that end up in Alabama's class. Linebacker wise, I think it's Henry Toula. So, like I said, my pop-up window with all the questions that usually pop in from all of you, not pulling up today for some reason, not sure why. So just wanted to go recap everything once again. If you missed any of the video, we'll have it posted on Bama Insider. It'll be on YouTube. If you have any questions, any other questions, or if you have any questions that I missed, come to Bama Insider. Sign up for a 30-day free trial. Check us out. You can ask me any questions that you have. I'll answer it. And I think you'll enjoy the site a lot. So thank you all for joining in today. That's just a quick update. We're going to come back, probably come back on Monday after the official visit weekend, and we kind of get more scoop on where things stand with other players who visited elsewhere. Come back on Monday, kind of update you guys. But if you want a daily update, you want an hourly update, a minute update, go to BamaInsider.com, where you can catch all the latest news on the recruiting front. So thank you all for joining today, and we will see you next time.